The story opens in an isolated forest where a mail carrier arrives to deliver a letter to a rundown house hidden among the trees. As he approaches, he senses that someone might be inside. He knocks repeatedly, but no one answers. Just as he turns to leave, a chilling scream pierces the silence from within the house. Shaken yet compelled to investigate, he rushes to a window boarded up with wooden planks. The scream echoes again. Without hesitation, he drops his mailbag and tries to peer through the cracks. Inside, there is only darkness. Unable to see anything, he steps back, reaches into his bag, and pulls out a flashlight. The story then shifts 3 decades into the future. The once forgotten forest has been transformed into a youth retreat where teenagers have come to disconnect from their digital lives. Among them are Josiah, Jewel, Anella, Barack, and Daniel, guided by their instructor, Miss Isa. On their first day, the group is divided into teams and sent on a jungle trek. After walking for some time, Jewel steps aside into the bushes to relieve himself. When he returns, he stumbles upon the mutilated remains of an animal. Terrified, he calls the others over. Miss Isa inspects the body and concludes that a large predator must be responsible. Still, she reassures the group, insisting she knows the forest well and that they are safe as long as they stay together. Nearby, Josiah notices what looks like a deep claw mark carved into a tree trunk, but when he blinks, it's gone. As evening approaches, the group sets up camp. Marianella struggles with pitching her tent and asks Daniel for help before heading to the river for a bath. Once night falls, Miss Isa lights a campfire, and everyone gathers around, laughing and talking. The mood is calm, until a tall shadow slips past the edge of the campsite. Startled, the group freezes. Taking charge, Miss Isa grabs a stick and goes to investigate. She returns shortly after, claiming it was only a fox. Even so, the easy atmosphere has vanished, and everyone retreats to their tents. Later that night, Daniel quietly sneaks out and heads to the riverside, where he begins blowing smoke into the cool air. Soon, Anella joins him. They exchange glances and start talking. She pulls out a balloon, and Daniel instantly understands her intention. Elsewhere in the forest, an elderly woman drags an animal carcass toward the basement of an abandoned house. Frail and exhausted, she loses her footing and tumbles down into the basement along with the body. In the darkness below, she lies unconscious. Suddenly, a hand emerges from the shadows and pulls the carcass deeper inside. The sound of bones snapping and flesh tearing fills the basement, jolting the woman awake. As she opens her eyes, she glimpses a shadow ascending the stairs. Back at camp, Anella eventually returns to her tent, but Daniel stays behind. Unable to sleep, he secretly pulls out a hidden phone and begins messaging someone. Completely absorbed in his screen, he fails to notice a presence creeping up behind him. By the time he senses danger, it's too late. A monstrous figure grabs him in a violent rage and slams him against a tree. And Daniel dies instantly. The next morning, Miss Isa realizes Daniel is missing. Anella mentions seeing him by the river the previous night. The group spreads out to search, but there is no sign of him. Josiah soon discovers dark stains on a tree trunk and calls the others over. Miss Isa dismisses it, claiming it's only tree sap, not blood, and urges everyone to stay calm. Back at camp, she decides to personally search for Daniel with Josiah and Jewel, while Anella and Barack remain behind in case Daniel returns. Jewel protests, pointing out that in horror films, splitting up usually leads to disaster. Miss Isa brushes off his fears, insisting it's her responsibility to find the missing boy. After walking deeper into the forest, they come across an old house. Under normal circumstances, entering without permission would be wrong, but concern outweighs caution. They knock, receive no answer, and step inside. Jewel hesitates at the doorway, feeling as though someone is standing right behind him. Fear pushes him forward and he joins the others. The air inside feels heavy and unnatural. They search the rooms but find nothing substantial. Suddenly, an old telephone begins ringing from below. Miss Isa lifts a loose section of wooden flooring, revealing stairs that lead to the basement. Without hesitation, she starts descending, Josiah following closely behind. What they discovered in the basement froze them in place. Daniel's lifeless body lay sprawled on the floor, his face drenched in blood. Panic surged through them. As they rushed toward the stairs, heavy footsteps thudded across the floor above. Jewel bolted toward the staircase in terror, while Josiah and Miss Isa stayed behind for a second too long. Realizing the danger, all three ducked back into the shadows of the basement. The sight was so grotesque that Jewel nearly gagged, but Miss Isa quickly clamped a hand over his mouth, silently warning him to stay still. The footsteps grew louder. Suddenly, the wooden hatch creaked open. A monstrous figure loomed at the top of the stairs. Without hesitating, Miss Isa forced herself to act. She smashed open a small basement window and pushed Josiah through first. Then she helped Jewel climb out, proving in that desperate moment what it truly meant to protect her students. Just as the boys were scrambling away, Daniel's phone began to ring from the floor. Miss Isa turned back to grab it, sacrificing her final chance to escape. Moments later, blood-curdling screams erupted from the basement. Back at camp, Barack and Anela sat talking quietly, unaware of the horror unfolding nearby. Suddenly, Barack felt a strange presence. When he turned around, his blood ran cold. He took off running, but the creature lunged forward and seized Anela, hurling her violently into the bushes. She died instantly. Barack sprinted blindly through the forest until he stumbled upon an old church. Inside, he found a priest and frantically told him everything. The priest, however, assumed Barack was hallucinating. He calmly explained that a storm had been raging for 2 days, and even the mobile networks were down. He offered water, trying to soothe him. Then the church telephone rang. Barack stared at it in horror, and everything went black. When he regained consciousness, he was tied tightly with ropes. The priest now appeared disturbingly different. His eyes gleamed with something dark and unnatural. Just as he reached toward Barack, a loud mechanical noise roared outside the church. Alerted, the priest stepped out to investigate. The old wood-cutting machine in the yard had somehow switched on by itself. As he approached to inspect it, someone shoved him from behind. He fell straight into the machine. His screams were brief. When the noise stopped, only silence remained, and a pair of shoes hung loosely from the creature's hand. Inside, Barack managed to loosen the ropes and free himself. He glanced out the window and turned pale. Quickly, he hid inside a nearby cupboard. Seconds later, the creature entered the room. It seemed to sniff the air, tracking human scent. Slowly, it moved toward the cupboard. Elsewhere, Josiah and Jewel barely escaped and found refuge in a distant bungalow. An elderly man opened the door. There was something unsettling about him. When Josiah asked to use a phone, he replied flatly that he had no phone. Only a gun. When she asked if he had seen anything unusual in the forest, the old man sighed and lifted the fabric covering his legs. He had none. He revealed that he was the same postman who had once come to deliver a letter to a cabin in this forest decades earlier, and never truly escaped. That night had cost him his legs and changed his life forever. He explained that the creature wasn't a single being, but two, twin brothers. 30 years ago, a poor single mother moved into a wooden house in the forest with her young sons. Though they struggled financially, they were happy. One afternoon, while playing outside, the boys witnessed something fall from the sky. A meteorite crashed into the forest, leaving behind a deep crater. Fascinated, they carried a fragment home. That night, a strange liquid seeped from the rock and was absorbed into their bodies. It carried an unknown virus that began transforming them from within. The next morning, their mother awoke to find them missing. Bloodstains led her to the basement. When she went downstairs, what she saw shattered her sanity. The boys' bodies were covered in painful boils and blisters, and they were devouring the family's pet cat raw. Horrified, she locked them in the basement and began lowering food down to them each day. As years passed, her mental state deteriorated. According to the postman, and the old woman seen in the forest had been that same mother, and she was eventually killed by her own sons. Josiah stood in stunned silence. The monsters haunting the forest were once children. She asked the postman how they could escape. He told her the nearest village was 2 days away and insisted it was safer to stay armed inside the bungalow. But Josiah refused to hide. She believed that facing the horror was the only way to end it. Determined, she decided to return to the cabin and retrieve Daniel's phone. Perhaps it still worked. Jewel, shaking with fear but unwilling to leave her side, followed. Together, they made their way back toward the cursed house. When they reached the cabin, one of the creatures was still inside. Jewel volunteered to go first, acting as a distraction so Josiah could slip in unnoticed. Fueled by courage, he ran out into the open and shouted, "Come out! Face me if you dare!" His voice echoed through the trees. Almost instantly, the monstrous figure emerged from the house. While it focused on Jewel, Josiah quickly sneaked inside. She searched frantically and managed to find Daniel's phone. But the creature returned sooner than she expected. She tried to run, but a massive hand wrapped around her throat and lifted her off the ground. Just then, Jewel rushed in from behind and drove the knife into the creature's back. The blade might as well have struck stone. It had no effect. With terrifying strength, the monster hurled Josiah aside and ripped the knife from Jewel's grip and killed him with it. Darkness swallowed her. When Josiah regained consciousness, she found herself chained in the same basement. Jewel's body lay nearby, barely alive. Desperate, she pulled out Daniel's phone. It was locked. With trembling hands, she pressed Jewel's finger against the screen to unlock it, but the battery was dead. That was the moment she broke. Jewel, barely breathing, begged her in a faint whisper to end his suffering. Tears filled her eyes. She didn't want to do it, but she couldn't ignore his pain. Picking up a dagger lying nearby, she made the hardest decision of her life. Upstairs, the twin brothers were still there. One of them was wounded and resting. The other had gone back out into the forest in search of another victim. On seizing her chance, Josiah used the dagger to cut through her chains and freed herself. She was about to flee when she paused. Quietly, she pried up a section of the wooden floor and looked through. The injured creature lay below, motionless. Without hesitating, she climbed down, approached it silently, and drove the dagger straight into its chest. Then she ran. Elsewhere in the forest, a local policeman was parked in his jeep, spending time with a woman. After she left, he leaned back to relax. Suddenly, Josiah came running out of the trees. Breathless, she told him everything. Alarmed, he immediately started the jeep and drove off with her. But after a short distance, the vehicle slammed into something unseen on the road. The officer stepped out to investigate. So Josiah begged him not to, but he ignored her. As he turned around, the creature stood inches away from him. Within seconds, he was dead. Josiah scrambled into the driver's seat and tried to start the engine, but it refused to turn over, as if fate itself was working against her. Meanwhile, the creature climbed onto the jeep, gripping a massive hammer. It smashed the windshield with brutal force. The glass cracked but didn't shatter. Finally, the engine roared to life. Josiah slammed her foot on the accelerator, throwing the creature off. It staggered, but didn't fall. She shifted into reverse and drove back over it again and again, refusing to stop until it stopped moving. Then she sped away. At last, Josiah escaped the nightmare that haunted the forest. And that's where this terrifying tale comes to an end.